Kevin Marshall sat in his cubicle on a Tuesday morning in March 2019, staring at a spreadsheet that would change his life. He was 46 years old, 18 years into a government career in Washington, D.C., and the numbers he just calculated were terrifying. He had exactly 19 more years until his pension kicked in at 65. 19 more years of this. The thought made his chest tight. 3 months later, Kevin did something his financial advisor called financial suicide. He quit his $95,000 a year job, walked away from a pension track worth over $1 million, and bought a one-way ticket to Da Nang, Vietnam, a place he'd never visited, where he didn't speak the language, with $52,000 in savings and no plan except to live more on less. His father, a retired government worker who dutifully served 35 years for his pension, stopped speaking to him. His financial advisor literally said, "You're destroying your future." But Kevin went anyway. For 8 months, everything went exactly as he'd imagined. Cheap rent, amazing food, beach living, money stretching beautifully. Then month 9 brought a conversation that shattered everything Kevin thought he knew about money. A financial strategy that could make his $52,000 last not just years, but potentially decades. And it's something no American financial advisor had ever mentioned to him. If you want more true stories of bold decisions and the people who risk everything to reinvent their lives, subscribe now so you never miss the next leap. Kevin Marshall's government career started with genuine idealism. Fresh out of college in 2001, he joined a federal agency believing he'd make a difference. The pay was decent. The benefits were excellent. The work was fine. By year 5, fine had become monotonous. By year 10, monotonous had become soul-crushing. But by then, Kevin had a mortgage, a routine, and something more powerful than either, the promise of a pension. The math was deceptively simple. If he stayed until 65, he'd receive roughly 60% of his highest salary for the rest of his life, plus full federal health care. His financial advisor had calculated the total value at over $1.2 million. All Kevin had to do was show up for 19 more years. The problem was that Kevin could feel those years. Not abstractly, viscerally. He'd wake up at 6:15 a.m., arrive at his desk by 8 o'clock, spend 8 hours processing paperwork and attending meetings that could have been emails, then drive home through D.C. traffic to eat dinner alone and collapse on the couch. Weekends were for recovering. Vacation days were for doctor appointments. He made $95,000 a year. In Washington, D.C., that was comfortable but not wealthy. After taxes, mortgage, car payment, insurance, and basic living expenses, Kevin was saving about $1,200 a month. He'd accumulated $52,000 in savings over several years, his only cushion beyond the promise of that eventual pension. His social life had withered. Most colleagues were either decades younger or decades older. Dating felt impossible with his schedule. His friends from college had scattered. At 46, Kevin realized he'd traded his present for a future that increasingly felt like a prison sentence with good health insurance. The breaking point came on an ordinary Tuesday. Kevin was updating a budget spreadsheet when he did the math. 19 years multiplied by 52 weeks multiplied by 5 workdays. 4,940 more days of this. The number sat on his screen like a death sentence. That night, Kevin couldn't sleep. He pulled up his laptop and started researching. Not retirement planning. Not early withdrawal penalties. He typed, "Cheapest places to live as an American." The research consumed Kevin. For 3 weeks, he spent every evening diving into expat forums, cost of living calculators, visa requirements. Thailand, Portugal, Mexico, Colombia. Every option seemed both thrilling and terrifying. Then he stumbled onto a blog post by an American named Doug who'd been living in Da Nang, Vietnam for 4 years. Doug broke down his actual monthly expenses. $650 for a modern apartment with ocean views, $300 for food, $50 for a gym membership, $100 for a scooter rental. Total, roughly $1,100 per month, including entertainment and occasional splurges. Kevin did the math. His $52,000 in savings could last nearly 4 years in Da Nang, maybe longer if he was careful. In D.C., that same amount would cover maybe 8 months of expenses. But it was more than numbers. Doug's blog showed photos of beach sunrises, modern cafes, friendly locals, a community of expats from around the world. Most striking, Doug wrote about feeling alive again, about having time, about days that didn't feel like an endurance test. Kevin looked at his government badge. 18 years of service. 18 years of security. 18 years closer to a pension worth over $1 million. And in that moment, something inside him broke. Or maybe something finally healed. Kevin realized he'd been calculating the wrong risk. The real risk wasn't leaving. The real risk was staying and waking up at 65, having never actually lived. 3 days later, Kevin scheduled a meeting with his supervisor. 2 weeks after that, he submitted his resignation letter. The effective date, 90 days. Just enough time to sell most of his possessions, sublet his apartment, and apply for a Vietnamese visa. His father's response came via email. "You're throwing away everything you've worked for. This is the most irresponsible decision I've ever witnessed." His financial advisor was more direct. "This is financial suicide. You're walking away from over $1 million in guaranteed retirement benefits. At 46, you'll never recover from this." Kevin's hand shook as he clicked purchase on a one-way ticket to Da Nang. Departure date, August 14, 2019. Total savings being transferred to his checking account, $52,000. Plan, none, except to figure it out. Kevin's first week in Da Nang was a blur of sensory overload. The heat, the traffic, the language barrier, the profound disorientation of being utterly, completely alone in a place where everything from ordering coffee to finding toilet paper required detective work. He'd rented a small studio apartment site unseen through an expat Facebook group for $150 per month, utilities included. It was basic but clean, 10 minutes from the beach. His first night, lying on an unfamiliar bed, listening to motorbike engines and unfamiliar voices, Kevin experienced a wave of panic so intense he couldn't breathe. What had he done? The first month was about survival, learning to cross streets without getting hit by scooters, finding the grocery stores that sold recognizable food, figuring out the bus system, opening a Vietnamese bank account, registering with the local police. Every small task felt monumental. His budget was tight but manageable. $500 for rent and utilities, $300 for food, $200 for transportation, and miscellaneous expenses. He was burning through roughly $1,000 per month. By his calculations, he could maintain this for at least 4 years, possibly 5 if he stayed disciplined. But loneliness was brutal. Kevin would spend entire days barely speaking. The expat community existed, but most were younger, digital nomads in their 20s and 30s running online businesses. Kevin felt ancient by comparison. He'd message people from expat groups, suggest coffee meetups. Most never replied. His father still wasn't speaking to him. His former colleagues had stopped responding to his emails. Kevin had walked away from his entire life, and the new one wasn't materializing. Month 3 brought a low point. Kevin found himself sitting on his apartment floor at 2 a.m., doing budget calculations on his phone. At his current burn rate, he had 43 months of runway. Then what? He'd be 50 years old in a foreign country, with no pension, no job prospects, and no safety net. His father's words echoed. Irresponsible, throwing everything away. He searched for American expat groups online, found one meeting at a cafe called a Coffee House on Tuesday evenings. Kevin almost didn't go. The idea of walking into a room full of strangers, admitting he was new, admitting he was struggling. It felt like exposure. But on Tuesday, he went. The group was small, maybe 10 people, mostly Americans and Canadians, ages ranging from late 20s to early 60s. They went around sharing stories. Digital nomads, retirees, English teachers. One guy named Richard who'd sold his insurance business in Florida to move to Da Nang with his wife. When it was Kevin's turn, he kept it brief. Former government worker, quit at 46, figuring things out. An older man across the table, maybe 60, tanned, relaxed, nodded with recognition. His name was Doug, the same Doug from the blog post that had initially inspired Kevin's research 6 months earlier. After the meetup, Doug approached him. Government pension track. Kevin nodded. I was NASA, Doug said. 22 years. Walked away at 53. That was 4 years ago. Best decision I ever made. Do you ever regret the pension? Kevin asked. Doug smiled. Let me buy you a beer. There's something you need to understand about money here. They sat at a rooftop bar overlooking the Han River. Da Nang skyline glittered across the water. Dragon Bridge lit up, modern high-rises reflecting the evening light. Doug ordered 2 beers, $1.50 each. You're $52,000, Doug began. That's your immediate number, but you're thinking about it wrong. Kevin leaned forward. Most Americans who move here think short-term. They calculate burn rate and runway. You've got what for years at your current spend. Doug didn't wait for confirmation. But you're not thinking about the real opportunity. Doug explained. In the U.S., Kevin's $52,000 was savings, something to protect, to slowly spend down, to ration carefully. In Vietnam, that same amount was capital. Seed money. The foundation for something that could generate income. Teaching English? Kevin asked, skeptical. I don't have certification. Doug laughed. Forget English teaching. I'm talking about investments that make sense here but would never work in the U.S. He pulled out his phone and showed Kevin his portfolio. Doug had taken his NASA retirement payout, about $80,000, and split it strategically. He kept $30,000 liquid for living expenses. The other $50,000 he'd invested in Vietnamese income-generating assets. The first investment, a small apartment in Da Nang. Doug bought it for $35,000, cash, no mortgage. It was modest, but in a decent neighborhood near the university. He rented it to a local Vietnamese family for $250 per month. Annual return, $3,000, or roughly 8.5%. In the U.S., $35,000 wouldn't even buy a parking space. Doug said, here, it generates $250 every single month. The second investment was more unconventional. Doug had partnered with a local Vietnamese friend to invest in a small cafe near the beach. His share, $15,000. The cafe generated modest profit, about $150 per month in dividend distributions to Doug. Not spectacular, but reliable. Combined with his rental income, Doug was pulling in roughly $400 per month in passive income. His living expenses, about $1,100 per month. The gap, $700, which he covered from his liquid savings. But here's what you're missing, Doug continued. In 4 years of living here, I've spent down maybe $30,000 of my liquid savings. Meanwhile, my apartment has appreciated to $42,000. My cafe stake has increased in value. My total net worth hasn't decreased. It's actually grown slightly, and I've been living in paradise. Kevin's mind reeled. He'd been thinking about his $52,000 as a depleting resource, a slowly burning fuse until he ran out. Doug was describing a completely different framework. You could do something similar. Doug said, keep $20,000 liquid for expenses. Take $30,000 and buy a small studio apartment. Rent it out. That's $200 to $250 per month in your pocket, every month, forever. Your cost of living drops from $1,000 to maybe $750. Suddenly, your $20,000 liquid savings lasts 3 times longer, and apartments here appreciate? Kevin asked. Da Nang is growing fast. Foreign investment. Tourism infrastructure. I bought my place 4 years ago for $35,000. It's worth $42,000 now, maybe more. That's a 20% gain while generating income the whole time. The conversation stretched past midnight. Doug introduced Kevin to other expats who'd made similar moves. A Canadian who owned 3 small studio apartments, generating $650 per month in total rent. A British retiree who'd invested in a language center partnership, pulling dividends. An Australian who bought a small shop space and leased it to a Vietnamese business owner. None of them were getting rich, but all of them had cracked the same code. In Vietnam, modest capital could generate income streams that fundamentally changed the financial equation. Instead of slowly spending down savings, they were building portfolios that generated cash flow while appreciating in value. Kevin walked home at 1 a.m., his mind spinning. For the first time in months, the knot of anxiety in his chest had loosened. He wasn't crazy. His $52,000 wasn't a slowly depleting resource. It was the seed capital for a completely different financial future. The next morning, Kevin reached out to Doug. "I want to learn more about real estate here." Doug replied within an hour, "Good. I know a Vietnamese lawyer who specializes in helping foreigners. I'll introduce you." 18 months after landing in Da Nang, Kevin's financial situation had transformed in ways his former financial advisor would never have predicted. In July 2020, Kevin purchased a 32-square-meter studio apartment in Sun Tra District for $28,000 cash. It was modest but well located, 10 minutes from Mai Key Beach, in a building with good management. He spent another $2,000 on minor renovations and furnishing. By September, he had a tenant, a Vietnamese teacher at a local university. Rent, $230 per month. Annual income, $2,760. Return on his $30,000 investment, 9.2%. That $230 per month cut Kevin's monthly burn rate dramatically. His living expenses averaged $1,000, but now $230 was covered by rental income. His effective monthly cost, $770. His remaining liquid savings, $22,000. At that rate, his cash runway extended to roughly 28 months, but that wasn't accounting for appreciation. By late 2021, Kevin's apartment had appreciated to approximately $33,000. He'd recovered his initial investment through appreciation alone, while simultaneously generating $230 monthly in cash flow. But the financial transformation was only part of the story. Kevin's life had developed structure and meaning that his government job never provided. He woke up without an alarm, usually around 6:30 a.m., and walked to a beachfront cafe where he'd have coffee and read for an hour. Mid-mornings were for Vietnamese language lessons. He was conversational now, not fluent but functional. He'd made friends with local cafe owners, his landlord, neighbors. The expat community had become his social circle. Weekly dinners, weekend beach trips, occasional travels to Hoi An or Hue. At 48, Kevin was in the best physical shape of his adult life. Daily swimming, regular gym visits, a diet heavy on fresh vegetables and fish. Most surprisingly, he'd started a small side income stream through the expat network. Kevin connected with several other foreigners interested in real estate investment, but intimidated by the process. He began offering consulting, essentially walking people through what Doug had taught him. He charged $200 per consultation. By 2022, he was doing roughly 2 consultations per month. Additional income, $400. His financial picture in December 2022. Liquid savings, $18,000. Real estate value, $33,000 apartment. Monthly passive income, $230 rent, plus $400 consulting, equals $630. Monthly expenses, $1,000. Monthly deficit, $370, covered by liquid savings. Liquid savings runway, nearly 4 years. But the real transformation wasn't the numbers. It was how Kevin felt. His father had eventually reached out, grudgingly admitting that Kevin seemed to be doing okay. His former colleagues checked in periodically, their messages tinged with something Kevin recognized as envy. Several had confessed they were counting down their own years to pension eligibility, trapped in the same cycle Kevin had escaped. In early 2023, Kevin received a LinkedIn message from a former co-worker named Tom. "I've been following your posts. I'm 44, and I can't do this for another 21 years. Can we talk?" Kevin called him that evening. Tom had $35,000 saved and was terrified of making the wrong move. Kevin talked him through the math, the realities, the fears. Not as recruitment, as honest counsel. "The scary part isn't leaving," Kevin told him. "The scary part is realizing you stayed too long." 3 months later, Tom messaged, "I'm putting in my notice next week. Thank you for showing me this was possible." Kevin had become, unintentionally, a proof of concept. Not for everyone. Many people genuinely value security and pensions, and that was valid. But for those suffocating under the weight of golden handcuffs, Kevin's path demonstrated an alternative. By mid-2023, Kevin's apartment had appreciated further to $35,000. His consulting income had grown to roughly $600 per month as word spread. His monthly deficit had shrunk to essentially zero. He was living comfortably, building equity, and genuinely happy. The financial advisor who called his decision financial suicide had been dead wrong. Kevin hadn't destroyed his financial future. He'd completely restructured it around a different set of assumptions that only worked because he'd been willing to step outside the American financial system entirely. In November 2023, Kevin turned 50. He celebrated on Key Beach with a small group of friends, expats he'd met over the past 4 years. Someone asked him if he ever regretted walking away from his pension. Kevin thought about it carefully. "The pension was worth about $1.2 million over the course of my retirement," he said, "but it required 19 more years of life I couldn't stand." The math made sense on paper, but there was a cost no one calculated. Here's what Kevin learned about money that his financial advisor never told him. First, American financial advice is built on American assumptions. High cost of living, expensive health care, geographic immobility, Social Security projections, tax considerations. Those assumptions create a financial paradigm that feels inescapable, but it's only inescapable if you stay within the system. Outside the U.S., the same dollar amount has completely different leverage. Kevin's $52,000 wouldn't have lasted 2 years in Washington, D.C. In Da Nang, it became seed capital for an income-generating portfolio. Second, financial security isn't about the size of your portfolio. It's about the relationship between your income and your expenses. In the U.S., Kevin made $95,000, but needed $75,000 to maintain a modest lifestyle. In Vietnam, his expenses dropped to $12,000 annually, while his income sources diversified. Third, geographic arbitrage isn't just about cheap living. It's about access to opportunities that don't exist in high-cost markets. Kevin couldn't have bought income-generating real estate in D.C. with $30,000. In Da Nang, it was not only possible but relatively straightforward. Fourth, the biggest financial risk is often the one you don't take. Kevin's financial advisor focused on the guaranteed pension he was walking away from, but he never calculated the cost of 19 more years of misery, declining health from stress, and retirement that arrived when Kevin was too old to enjoy it. Finally, financial independence isn't about having enough money to never work. It's about having enough leverage that work becomes optional. Kevin's rental income and consulting work didn't make him rich, but they made him free. The kicker, in 2024, Kevin was approached by a real estate investor in Da Nang about purchasing his apartment. The offer, $38,000. Kevin declined, not because the return wasn't good, but because his tenant was reliable and his rental income was steady. He was thinking like an investor now, not a saver. Kevin's story doesn't work for everyone. Geographic relocation requires massive disruption, tolerance for uncertainty, and willingness to live outside your cultural comfort zone. Many people would be miserable living Kevin's life. But for those who feel trapped by golden handcuffs, Kevin's path reveals something important. The American retirement paradigm: work for 30 to 40 years, accumulate savings, retire at 65, isn't the only option. It's just the default option in a high-cost economic system. Kevin didn't abandon financial responsibility. He restructured his financial assumptions around a different geographic and economic reality. The result: freedom at 46 instead of a pension at 65. As Kevin watched the sunset from Key Beach on his 50th birthday, he thought about his father's email from 4 years earlier. "You're throwing away everything you've worked for." Kevin smiled. He'd thrown away a pension, but he'd gained his life back. And unlike his father's pension, Kevin's freedom had already started paying dividends. If this story inspired you, subscribe and share with someone who might be standing at the edge of their own bold leap today.